You ready?
Ready.
Hi, I'm Carol Milne. I'm here at my studio in Seattle. And what I just did here, for you adrenaline junkies, that's about as crazy as I get. I just added some glass to a mold that's in the kiln at 1500 degrees. And that's what I do. So I'm a sculptor, and I work mostly in cast glass. And the process I use is the lost wax casting process and knitting also. So come over here. This is where I do most of my wax work. What I do, I can't knit with the wax directly. It comes in long strands of different dimensions. So what I do with it is I wrap it around knitting needles and make coils. And then I open up the coils and I knit them together by hand. So here's, just interlock by hand. And then once I get a shape or something here, this is like many rows knitted together. Knitting is flexible, so I would shape it how I want it, and then I have to melt wax into all the joints so it stays stable and so it's all connected. That's what I'm working on here. I'm supporting the piece with these bricks, and the brown wax is a stronger wax that I hold the joints together. So this piece has a ways to go yet, but it's starting to get stable. If it's not stable for the next part, then it's not a good thing. So the next piece I do is here's an example over here. This is actually what this piece is going to look like. I've bent it, but it will look like this. All these additions are ways for the wax to get out and for the glass to get in. So they all get cut off later. But what happens is I will make a mold around this whole thing out of plaster and silica. I'll turn the mold upside down and take a wallpaper steamer and melt all of the wax out. So then I'll end up with a plaster mold with an empty space where the wax was. Then I take that whole mold and I put it in the kiln like you just saw at the beginning, and this wax will all be gone, but there'll be an empty space where I'll add the glass, and the glass slowly melts down in. And then once it's been in there for long enough, which is usually 4 or 5 days, sometimes longer, I will take the mold out of the kiln, break off the plaster to reveal the glass inside. So it's all a one-of-a-kind process. A lot of what I've done is knitting with the knitting needles still in it. And that work I think of, we can look at an example over here. This piece here. So this work I think of as a celebration of the creative process. So it's knitting, the needle's still there, it's not finished, and yet you're putting it on a pedestal to look like it's finished. And that makes me laugh, and it also celebrates the part that I think is most important, the process of making the artwork rather than the finished piece. Similar to this, where it's two hands knitting themselves. So the knitting here is connected back to the hands. That series kind of started as a joke, initially taking the Escher drawing with the hands knitting themselves as hands drawing themselves. Oh, what if you had two hands knitting themselves? But then I continued to make the series, and I had several key mentors in my life pass away. And then for me, it took on this different meaning of, what does it mean to knit yourself, to become your own mentor? So I find myself still coming back to that work and dwelling on what that means. In this case, this one is like, I call this water wings. To me, it's a few years out from the loss, and it's like the piece is starting to float on its own. So the piece that's in the kiln right now is actually another piece in this series. So you'll have to wait to see what that one is. Other work I've done, I mean, most recently I did this piece I called Radiant. Because of the pandemic, I'm starting to, seems like making more Mobius strips, pieces that circle around or have these interior spaces that are caged. I'm not exactly sure where that's going, but that's where my mind has been. I've done some knitting in the round, like the dark blue piece there called Truly Scrumptious. To me, that's got kind of a figurative feel to it. Even though there's no person in it, it has that feel for me. And I had a residency at Amazon last year. And that's Amazon headquarters in Seattle. And I was inspired to do work based on their spheres. They have these large geodesic domes with greenhouses in them. So this is one of the pieces I did there. It was made of all these different four-sided diamond shapes that go together to make a hexagonal, I can't remember the name, hexahedron. So then in this piece, there are 60 pieces, and I asked the people who worked at Amazon, what color is Amazon? And they all chose from a chart. Now, as it turns out, orange is Amazon's official color, which I didn't know. So half the people were conformist and chose orange, and the other half chose other colors. The choice of black was interesting to me. I left those empty. That's another subject altogether. And hanging from the ceiling here is part of a piece called Viper that I made in 2017. It was a 40-foot long, kind of snake skin. It was part of the Bellevue Sculpture Biennial in 2017. It was a 40-foot or 16-foot long, 40-foot long sculpture that was in a space about 16 feet high with a kind of a snake head with knitting needles for fangs. It has since morphed into this wall quilt idea. And those are based on a knitting technique called entrelac, where you have apple core shapes that fit together and change directions. So that's the basics. I have these two interior spaces, and I have the exterior space where I have my kiln. And because the climate is fairly mild here, I do a lot of my messy work outside, mold making and cleanup and such. Thanks.